language acquisition development levels of your students. So it's really important, and ESL teachers have had much more training in this area, but often we don't go over this with classroom teachers. So we're going to do a quick and dirty language acquisition 101 in 15, 20 minutes. So it's really good to review this information for classroom teachers, because again, being aware of these levels and this information is foundational in becoming a sheltered teacher, which I would bet we all are in this room. So one of the key research findings that we look at and study, although is a little outdated now, however they have updated this throughout the years, is this research study from Thomas and Collier. And what these people did, they come out of George Mason University in DC area, and they looked at records of thousands and thousands, over 20,000 student records, and tried to figure out which program model would most effectively and quickly close the achievement gap. Because wouldn't we want to move toward that, right? So they found some things in their findings and put together a research study. You can get the entire research document. I actually have a copy in my office. I can set on the table tomorrow if you want to look at it. Especially if you're in a bilingual program or bilingual teacher, it's really key you're familiar with this research. It's pretty instrumental. But the one research point I want to highlight is this. What they found was there was this significant program, this thing that happened when there was this perception among students, staff, and parents that it was like a gifted program. So what this means is, and I know Portland Public, and we are as well, you've been trained in courageous conversations, so everybody in the room should be really familiar with this. And the point that reminds me of from this training is that of interest convergence from critical race theory. This is interest convergence. If you can place the program in the place where it's going to have the perception of a gifted program, but yet extremely beneficial for English learners, there's your interest convergence. Now it's benefiting the majority culture or the whoever has the power, but it's also a program that people are going to buy in and support. So you see this happen in places like Oceanside, California, where they've strategically placed their two-way programs in places that are going to draw those parents in. You see this in Salem, where I came from before here, where West Salem Language Academy was specifically placed on the other side of the river in West Salem. And people would drive across the river to get into that program. And it was seen as this exemplary gifted program. And guess what? It's the best program for English learners, too. So that, my friends, is interest convergence. And that's why if we can sell this model as a gifted program, but we know it's benefiting the most in need, let's do it. Let's do it. So other things they found was that the ESL pullout was the least effective model, and it was most effective if a second language is taught through academic content and focused on academic vocabulary. So those are 2 points, and we kind of know that. Just briefly, we can talk hours about this graph, but you need to at least be aware of this graph. So this graph is what I was talking about when they took all those student records and they put them into a graph form of which program model is going to most quickly close the achievement gap. As you can see, I'll try and do this briefly, there's about a 30-point achievement gap, and they did their research in NCEs, which stands for normal curve equivalent, and it's basically a stable percentile. So they just chose to do their research instead of the percentiles and NCEs, which they claim are more stable, because you know how percentiles stretch at the ends. NCEs don't. So what they found is an English learner enters our school system in kindergarten about the 20th NCE, and a native English speaker is going to plug along about the 60th NCE, making 10 months progress, 10 months time. And there's about this 30 to 40 point achievement gap. So what they did is they plugged in, over time, followed students in these various program models to see which program model will most quickly and effectively close the achievement gap. Because if we all do this, That's not closing achievement gaps. We want there to be gap closure. So what they found when they followed the ESL pullout, which is the first model they looked at here, is that there is some quick gains in the primary grades because of that focus on kind of rote English language development, and then it planes off and students end up about where they started, really. When you add in some content-based ESL practices, that alone will jump you to about the 35th NCE. So that is a huge option we have as educators, if we don't have the option of a bilingual model, to at least be focusing ourselves on content-based instruction, connecting with what's going on in the classroom. And I've been saying for years, until we marry those two worlds, what's happening in the ESL classroom and what's happening in the general ed setting, we're never really going to see achievement of our English learners. So we've got to have those two worlds come together, and when they start to come together, you end up about there. An early exit program plus content-based is the green triangle line, and if you follow that one, that means that the students were in native language something for the first couple of years and then transitioned out, the goal being English literacy, and that ends up a little bit higher. The next two programs are more developmental programs, and those are when you're using the student's native language significantly and developmentally, meaning all the way through the grades so they become bilingual, biliterate, and that is the program goal. And you can see how those end up closing the achievement gap at about the 7th, 8th grade. So, and they actually outperform their English speaking peers in a two-way program. So, again, if you're in a bilingual setting, you've probably seen this graph and should know it very well. But it's good to look at for all of us, because as you're program planning, as you're looking to improve your services to English learners, this is something that can come out of your back pocket to look at, to review, to share with administrators as you're planning what program model is going to be most effective for your school and what you can pull out with the resources you have. Obviously, you can't do one of these models if you don't have the language support, but at least to be aware of it.
Do we have a chart in our binder?
I don't think you have this in your binder, but I can make copies of this. I just used it at a workshop a couple weeks ago, and we could print that out for you.
You can find it on Thomas and Collier's website also, which is I think thomasandcollier.com. If you Google or search engine their names, you'll find it.
This will come up. And
they have updated the graph, and this is with the current numbers.
Wayne and Virginia are their names.
And I'll write up their, isn't it up there, NCELA? What's the difference between the two-way DLE and one-way? What this refers to, one-way, refers to one language group of students represented, for example, all Spanish speakers in the room, and the language is being delivered with both English and the native language, in that case Spanish. So for example, in Salem we've been implementing a little bit of Literacy Squared. That would be an example of a one-way model because it's all speakers of the same language. The reason the achievement is higher with the two-way, that means you have two groups of language speakers, one who speaks, let's say, Spanish and one English, and they're learning each other's language together, and you have that interaction with native speaking peers, and that's why they see higher gains, is because you're forced to work in a group and do projects with people who are forcing you to use that second language that may not be your native language. Does that make sense? Anybody want to add anything to that? Because I know there's people who in the room who are very knowledgeable about this.
The big thing with one way is typically the teachers the only model for the other language they're learning. Like in this, where the teachers the only strong model of English, where the two-way. The kids that are learning Spanish have only native Spanish speakers, and then the other way, the kids that are learning English have only native English speakers to model the language. So there's a lot more models that offer Spanish and for all that out too, instead of just coming to the teacher.
Good point.
This is pretty key to our field, so let's take a moment to digest that and just tell the person next to you what stood out for you.